Greetings everybody. Here's a question I'm finding on quiz 3, and if we had an assignment that was just this style of question, then once you figured out how to solve one, you could solve the others just like it. But if it's on the quiz, then it may be different than the question right before it or the one right after it, and we need to figure out how we identify this kind of question in the solution method. Okay, so it says we have a population mean and standard deviation. We take a sample of a certain size, and then we want to find the probability that the mean of that sample is more than 221. So here's how I would identify all the aspects of the question in the solution. Okay, do we have a population to start with a mean and standard deviation? Yeah, we do. So it says there's a population has a mean of 220 and a standard deviation of 6.1. So I'd say yes to that one. Did we take a sample of size n from the population, a sample of some size with that number being given? And I'd say yeah, it says we took a sample of size 75. Okay. All right, so check on the first one, check on the second one. Do we want to calculate the probability about the mean of the sample? So what does it say? It says find the probability that the sample mean is more than 221. So again, I'd say yes to that one. And then here in this last bubble is the solution. Use the normal distribution. So wait a second. If we use the normal distribution, there's an easy way to do that in StatCrunch. We open StatCrunch, we go to calculators, and then normal. Okay, so this will be the key. I have to tell it what the mean and standard deviation is supposed to be though. But let's look back at this. We use the normal distribution. Okay, so I got my normal calculator up. I'm going to use this. And I use the mean to be whatever the mean of the population was to start with. And I use the standard deviation to be the standard deviation of the population divided by the square root of n, the sample. So that's what I do. So I've got to enter this information in to StatCrunch. I got to tell it what the mean and standard deviation is supposed to be. So I'm going to, maybe you could try that and you could say, oh, what these numbers are supposed to be. I'm actually going to pause the video and then write them down and reveal it. All right, and here's all the information about the normal distribution that we're going to use. I went ahead and wrote everything down from the problem. We were given a population mean of 220, standard deviation 6.1, sample of size 75 was taken, and then we want to use the normal distribution with a mean of 220 and a standard deviation of 6.1 over root 75, and I round that out so I can type it into the normal calculator of 0.7044. Okay, so let's see. Mean 220, standard deviation 0.7044, and I wanted to calculate, what was it again? I wanted to calculate the probability of the sample mean being greater than 221. So I can figure my calculator to be greater than, and then it was 221, and I compute it, and there's my probability. Okay, so all right, let's see. How should we type that in? Which of those numbers should we put in? It says round to 4 decimal places, so I got 0.0778, and that would be the 4th digit, the 8, and then the next one is a 5. So that means rounding to 4, I'll get 0.0779. Okay, so that's it, rounded to 4 decimal places. Okay, so whoops, 0. So next I get this question about, okay, so that's the calculation part. All right, that's the flow chart. Okay, that's how we identify the scenario and what we do. So these first 3 boxes are the scenario that we're given. You could read all that in the question. That's how you know what it is. And then this last one is what we do to calculate any given probability. Okay, so the next part says this. Is the sample mean considered unusual? Okay, the sample mean is or is not considered unusual for whatever reason. So let's talk about that a little bit, what it means for a data number, okay, to be unusual or not. and it would come down to this. The sample mean that you gave me, 221, would be unusual if it's more than 2 standard deviations from the mean of the distribution. So think back to when I used StatCrunch here. I'm working with a distribution that has a mean of 220 and a standard deviation of 0.7 or 0.7044. Okay? So if the data point you gave me, 221, is more than 2 standard deviations from the mean of the distribution, then it is unusual. So what I did is I just drew a line graph here, and I counted from the mean 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations in both directions. So the mean's 220. The standard deviation that we used was 0.7044. Okay, so if I take 220 plus 0.704, I get this number. If I do plus again, I get this number, 221.408. If I minus it, I get this number. If I minus it again, I get this one. So I have the mean, I have the range that's 1 standard deviation from that mean, and then I have the range that's 2. Now, to answer the question, if the sample mean 221 is unusual, I'd have to see, is 221 more than 2 standard deviations from the mean? I've got it all mapped out here. 221's right there, just to the left, slightly underneath 221.4. So what's that mean? It means that it's not quite 2 standard deviations away. It's a little bit less than that. It's not more than 2 standard deviations away. So that means it would not be unusual, because it does not lie because it lies within 2 standard deviations of the mean. Okay, there it is. It's here, and 2 standard deviations goes all the way to here. All right. Okay, so that's how we answer it. Both parts. Let me know if that helps you or not.